The first emotion I felt when I heard my brother had died was relief. That was quickly followed by guilt, but the relief had definitely gotten there first. I suppose that makes me a bad person, but honestly, I was surprised I hadn't gotten that call years earlier. Eric had always been reckless. Even as a kid, I remember him jumping off the second-story roof of our house and just barely making it far enough to land in the pool. He called me a pussy when I refused to try. "Someday I'll get you to have a little fun," he taunted. But once he was old enough to drive, he really went off the deep end. He had used the little money our parents had left us to buy what I thought was the stupidest and most impractical vehicle I had ever seen: a bright red 1988 Ford Thunderbird. The damn thing guzzled gas, the muffler rumbled like it could fall off any second, and I don't think it ever had two working taillights. He drove that car without regard to anyone's safety, including mine, the few times he'd allowed me to tag along. Weaving in and out of lanes, blatantly ignoring speed limits, always blasting Def Leppard with the windows down. Frankly, it's amazing he lasted as long as he did with the way he drove. When I finally got into college, I moved about as far away as I could. People joked that Eric and I were like oil and water, but I thought that baking soda and vinegar was more apt. Eric had a way of getting under my skin that no one else could match. Everything turned into a fight. I was always the one who ended up bruised. I would call him out for being reckless. He would tell me I didn't have an ounce of fun in my body. I couldn't wait to get away from him. When I got the call that he had wrecked his stupid car and died, I was just thankful he didn't hurt anyone else. Apparently, he had tried passing a school bus on the shoulder of a rural highway, lost control, and slammed into a tree. Of course, he hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. I'm pretty sure the Thunderbird hadn't had any working seatbelts in years. And of course, he had been drunk. As his last living relative, it fell to me to clean out the dump he called an apartment and settle his affairs. Of course, I couldn't do that from my dorm room 3 states away. I knew I could probably get it all done in a long weekend, but only if I drove through the night to get there. I wanted to be back for class on Tuesday. The school would have given me more time off, given the circumstances, I'm sure. But I just couldn't bring myself to let Eric derail my life any more than he already had. I had barely made it out of high school because of his antics. When he was alive, I'll be damned if his death was going to screw up my future. I packed up my little Honda Civic. It was great on gas, the muffler was firmly attached, and both taillights worked, and set out just as the sun was setting, leaving campus and my new life behind so I could finally, definitively slam the door on my old life. By the time I crossed into our home state, it was well after midnight. The moon was nowhere to be seen behind the thick blanket of gray clouds that seemed to be draped over the rolling hills, barely staying aloft over the farm fields nestled in between. I had long grown tired of the few CDs I had in my car, so I turned on the last refuge of the bored driver, local radio. I could only land one station, delicately perched between bursts of static. Fortunately for me, the DJ seemed to share my affinity for light rock, and I got to bob my head to the smooth tunes of Phil Collins. The miles rolled on. Traffic had been getting thinner and thinner, and now I found that my own headlights were the only source of illumination in the darkness. I had just passed the last exit for the next 20 miles when I saw the first dual pinpricks of light in my rearview mirror. They grew rapidly, and I realized someone was coming up behind me, fast. Well, they should have no problems passing me, I thought. After years of being terrorized in Eric's passenger seat, I never drove more than 5 over the speed limit. He tried to give me exactly one driving lesson once I'd turned 16. He got so frustrated with what he called my granny driving that he punched me so hard in my shoulder that the resulting bruise took 2 weeks to fade. Then he took me on what he called a demonstration, weaving in and out of traffic at an alarming speed, brake checking what he called the slows, riding in the right lane, and tailgating with alarmingly little space between his bumper and the poor soul in front of us. I had screamed and cried for him to stop as I pushed my body as hard as I could into the seat, palms clammy, tears streaming down my face. I shook off the unpleasant memory as the lights of the car behind me raced up at a frightening pace. I expected to see them glide into the left lane and speed past, leaving me to the quiet isolation I had been enjoying. However, the lights, and the car I assumed they were attached to but couldn't see in the darkness, seemed like they were coming up right behind me. My pulse quickened and I felt a pang of anger. Why wouldn't they just move over and pass me? They could just go around and leave me in peace. The lights screamed up so quickly that for a second I actually braced to be rear-ended, even tightly closing my eyes to prep for the impact. It never came. I opened my eyes again, momentarily blinded by the blazing light now filling my small car. The vehicle behind me hadn't hit me, but it must have been no more than a foot or two from my bumper. The high beams burned into my car. The driver was clearly unhinged, and I wanted nothing more than be out of his way. I turned on my directional and tried to move into the left lane, hoping, praying, he would just continue on. The car hesitated a moment, revved its engine, and then roared past me. Finally, my headlights revealed my tormentor. My heart caught in my chest. Eric's car. The red Thunderbird. No, I told myself. It just looks like his car, nervously chuckling at my own foolishness. Of course, anyone who drives such a pile of junk would be just as reckless as my brother. The old beast roared ahead, belching noisy exhaust from what was clearly a broken muffler. I breathed a sigh of relief as the single functioning taillight pulled ahead, grateful to be free from this showboating prick. My heart leapt when I saw the sign announcing the upcoming rest stop. I could take a break, calm my nerves, and let that psycho get well ahead of me on the road. As I pulled into the parking spot, I surveyed the nearly empty lot and sighed with relief at the absence of any crappy old Thunderbirds. I told myself that I was being silly, allowing myself to be frightened by this jerk. But my palms were still sweating as I pulled open the door to the rest stop. It was one of the old ones, without all the fancy restaurants and staff milling about, just a dirty bathroom and a broken water fountain. The light inside flickered, and I scanned the place. One stall was occupied, but otherwise it was deserted. I walked up to the sink and splashed some cold water on my face, washing away the sweat and the miles. As I wiped my eyes, I heard the stall behind me creak open. I glanced up instinctively into the dirty mirror, my vision still blurry from the water. Eric was standing in the entrance to the stall, pointing at me. I screamed. "Jesus, dude, what's your problem?" came an unfamiliar voice. Not Eric at all, I realized, blinking away the water. Not even close, in fact. Just another traveler on the road, who understandably skittered out the door without washing his hands, as I weakly muttered an apology. So stupid, I thought to myself, shaking my head. I headed back out to the car, ready to move on. Mine was now the only car left in the lot. I eased my Civic back onto the highway, slowly accelerating back up to speed. I briefly caught a glimpse of a single taillight ahead of me, but it quickly disappeared over the next hill. My heart briefly skipped a beat, remembering the burned-out taillight I had seen earlier. But no, I thought. With how fast the Thunderbird had been going, it must be in the next county by now. Or burned up in a ditch. The road was thankfully deserted again. Despite my best efforts, my thoughts drifted to Eric. One time he'd picked me up from band practice, tearing into the high school parking lot with tires squealing, reaching over to open the passenger door, even as the car was coming to a rest. It was only after I'd gotten in that I smelled the wine on his breath. Night train. It was all he ever drank. But he sped away before I could protest or get out of the car. In the fight that followed, he'd given me a mean-spirited laugh and said, "I swear I'll get you to loosen up and break the rules someday, you little dweeb." He said it would do me good to get in trouble, just once. It was the day I resolved to move away as far as possible. I was jogged from my memory by a blast of static from the radio, interrupting the moody blues song that had just come on. The uncanny pop of the static gave way to Def Leppard's hysteria, somehow mid-song. It was uncomfortably loud, immediately transporting me back to the dirty passenger seat of Eric's Thunderbird. I gaped at the radio with astonishment, desperately turning first the volume and then mashing the power button without any effect. While I was distracted, I crested the hill, and suddenly, there was a car in front of me, seemingly out of nowhere. The single taillight burned like an eye, and I could tell the car ahead of me had slammed on its brakes. Panicking, I also stomped down on my brake pedal and tried to swerve into the left lane. My heart pounded as that same red Thunderbird slipped into the beam of my lights once again. I let out an involuntary, audible whimper. I could hear the engine rev up to pull even with me, muffler rumbling. As my fender slid inches past the side mirror of the Thunderbird, I realized that the window was open, but I couldn't see the driver. In fact, there appeared to be nothing but an impossibly black void inside. The car sped up again, keeping pace with me, so we were side by side. I was too terrified to try to stop, and there were no exits for miles. Inexplicably, my own passenger side window started to slowly lower. I slammed on the button for the power window to raise back up, to no avail. The screeching Def Leppard from the radio grew painfully loud, even though I had never touched the knob. My mind split in two, one half screaming that Eric had come back to torment me once again, the other insisting that was impossible. I stared desperately ahead at the road, willing myself not to look back into that demon car. My sweaty palms gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 so tight that my knuckles turned white. My peripheral vision caught an object as it abruptly flew into the window, bouncing sharply off the passenger seat before coming to a rest on the floor. The dark liquid that gushed out of the bottle splashed across my chest. The thick smell of cheap wine hit me immediately, filling me with dread. Night train. I screamed when my foot stomped the accelerator to the floor, pushing my little Honda harder than I ever had before. Finally, I started to sense the Thunderbird falling behind. As the speedometer needle slipped past 80. Still, I wasn't away from him. 85, starting to gain some distance. 90, I had to escape. 95, and the Honda's engine screamed with protest. The headlights of the Thunderbird finally receded into the distance. Still, I raced on, desperate to escape the horror of what had just occurred. Just as the sun started to peek up in my rearview mirror, I saw another set of headlights, this time underneath two spinning blue and red lights. I looked down, finally broken from my daze, to realize I was going well over 90, soaked in cheap wine. A laugh bubbled up in my chest as I slammed the accelerator down even further.